I can't say that.
Huh?
There's got to be a pan or something.
Do you want me to yell hi?
No.
Hi!
Tall and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes, each one she passes goes.
We are finally hitting the legendary CATCH-22. You might be able to see a little bit of an outline of a bookcase over here. The move-in has officially commenced, and the book collection has expanded probably threefold, if not more. Probably more. I'm excited to talk about CATCH-22 today. As I mentioned last week, this was a book that has been on my to-read list forever. I had it for an assignment in high school, and I Spark Noted it. And I really remember the moment that I finished the Spark Note. I got to the end and just thought, damn, that was actually a really good story, and I totally regretted not actually reading the book. But I did forget a lot of the plot points, and so I was excited to dive back into this thing and truly experience what it had to offer. The other part that's changed since the first reading of CATCH-22 is I got a little more context. I have read a few more authors like Thomas Pynchon who have specifically cited this book as a huge influence for their writing, and it's pretty obvious why. First of all, CATCH-22 is full of these absurd characters. There's just so many. It feels like right when you get introduced to one, a second one rolls down the hallway, and you get to hear a little bit about their backstory, and then another one comes through, and it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And there's definitely a focus on characters in this novel. As you can tell at the beginning, most of the chapters start with a character's name. But don't be fooled, those chapters are not totally about those characters. A lot of it is kind of used as a free association connection between chapters. It'll start out with a certain character from the last chapter, kind of go up in an arc, and you'll hit the subject, and then it'll go back down talking about somebody else to lead into the next chapter, and it just goes on and on and on. I know that can definitely make reading CATCH-22 difficult. It is actually the #1 spot on the Goodreads list of books started. What the hell am I trying to say?
I feel like you already said it.
I didn't, though. I know that can make reading this difficult. CATCH-22 is actually on the Goodreads how do I phrase that?
Most unfinished novels.
Okay. I know that can make reading this difficult. CATCH-22 is actually the #1 spot on the Goodreads list of most unfinished novels. And it's not just because of the characterization aspect of it, but also because the timeline is just whack. I personally thought that made CATCH-22 a lot easier to read because with the timeline being kind of out of place, you revisit a lot of events as the novel goes along, and certain things that kind of seemed like they were unimportant at the beginning can come back to haunt you really as you go through the novel, and you'll get a lot more detail. And so I think that almost aids the retention of certain aspects of the plot and certain characters. You're going to hear about them multiple times, and so you're not going to forget as you go along. It'll really help reinforce those ideas. The other great part about it is jokes will be set up on page 100 or something, and then 200 pages later you'll hit the punchline and you'll just sit there being like, God damn, that was brilliant. But that doesn't mean that the book is just a series of jokes upon jokes. It really kind of goes through this progression where you start it off, and like I said, there's these absurd characters that have these really general traits, and as you go along you'll notice that the chapters start to shift away from just general characters' names and more into something like Milo the Militant or an actual place in Europe where the war was taking place. It is a war novel after all, and the central theme of it is about this CATCH-22 that's kind of an absurd rule that states that if you are willing to fly these combat missions, you're probably crazy, but if you actually go to somebody and say that you want to be grounded, that shows that you're sane, and therefore you have to go fly some more. Thus the CATCH-22, there's no way out of getting out of these flights. And so that premise gets explained very lightheartedly at the beginning, but then you start noticing these catch-22s apart from that main premise that kind of define a lot of the military bureaucratic mess. You'll keep seeing these thematic entrapments throughout the entire novel, and it starts to become pretty heavy because it affects these characters really severely. One thing to keep in mind, though, is though this is an anti-war book, I think that it's kind of good to have the context that when Joseph Heller was writing this, it wasn't supposed to be against World War II and the motives behind why we were at war there. He acknowledged that there were evils that needed to be defeated, but he was kind of looking at, like I said, the military bureaucratic mess as a whole, and actually kind of having more of a comment on the wars that happened later on, like the Vietnam War. And so I'd say it's an anti-war novel overall, but definitely not anti-World War II, which I think is an important distinction. All the same, you really do start to feel for the characters, especially Yossarian, the main character. He's actually the one that's really trying to get grounded more than almost anybody else, because he has this feeling that everybody's trying to kill him, not just the Germans or any of the enemies in World War II, but even those that are on his side, those that are in the military. He thinks that they're intentionally trying to get him to fly so that a terrible thing will happen to him and he'll die in that way. And again, it seems funny at first. A lot of it's so simplified at the beginning. It's like, oh, crazy Yossarian. But as you go on, you start to realize why he feels the way he does. And certain events that were passed over quickly at the beginning, again, become more prevalent. And you start to understand that there's a lot of horrific stuff going on, things that we've never experienced, well, at least those of us that haven't gone to war ourselves, and it's pretty terrifying. And if you were in that situation, you would probably want to be grounded too. But Catch-22, you can't. But if you are willing to go down that dark path and kind of read about these horrific experiences, I think it is worth picking up Catch-22, because I did find myself laughing out loud pretty consistently throughout the beginning of the book with a lot of these juxtaposing ideas of characters. One example at the beginning of the book, they talk about the Texan. It's the first chapter, and they get to a point where it shows that he's this really good-natured guy. In fact, the quote here, it says, "The Texan turned out to be good-natured, generous, and likable. In 3 days, no one could stand him." Another great moment is with the character Major. Is that right? That is 4. And after going through a lot of these very pious traits in him, it concludes with, "He never once took the name of the Lord his God in vain, committed adultery, or coveted his neighbor's ass. In fact, he loved his neighbor and never, ever bore false witness against him. Major's elders disliked him because he was such a flagrant nonconformist." Pretty subtle jab there. Overall, I thought it was an amazing book. I was really enraptured the whole time. It was about 450 pages, and I could not put it down. Despite having other responsibilities for the last 2 weeks, every spare moment I got, I sat down and read just a few more pages. This is one of the most unique war books I've ever read, and I'm really glad that I finally got around to doing it. I've heard the next great one to read, which was again one that I should have read before, one that I started and stopped. Next on the list is Gravity's Rainbow, so we'll see how long that one takes to get to. Here's my own rainbow right here.
Shut up. That was the worst thing you've ever said.
She's great. Feels
Microphone looks dumb.
This feels weird now. What should I say? And though Pynchon does have a lot of characters, just like Joseph Heller does in this novel, I think Pynchon kind of lets them come into the story and quickly leave. And the thing with Catch-22 that I really savored was the fact that there really were no minor characters. Everybody got fleshed out one way or another, whether that be in a really heroic way or oftentimes in a way that was either disturbing or pretty sad. I can definitely see why Catch-22 is a classic and has made its way into the schools, and all I can say is don't be like me. Don't sleep on this thing. There's a reason that Catch-22 is considered a classic, and why it was such a social force that Catch-22 made it into the common vernacular. Well, my library has expanded thanks to this one. And I'll have plenty to choose from for the next couple weeks. We'll see what happens. But there may be a discussion video next week, and if not, I'll choose a short one. I'm looking into some Vonnegut next at some point here pretty soon. But should be a good time.
If I'm not a guest on the Vonnegut episode, I'm going to be pissed.
And I hope you join me for those upcoming videos. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. The end.